Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
PMS, pregnancy, menopause. Being a woman is a lot. Ollie supports you and yours with expert solutions for every age and life stage. They just launched 2 new products exclusively at Walmart. Period Hero combats bloat, mood swings, and more during PMS. And Balance Perimeno to support hormonal balance, mood, and metabolism during perimenopause. Grab yours at ollie.com. Ollie! These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I focus on crimes committed by military members and veterans. But don't worry, you don't have to know anything about the military to listen. You basically have to have watched all the true crime documentaries on Netflix. And if that's you, welcome home, because same. And on that note, who has watched all things Menendez Brothers on Netflix and Peacock and YouTube? If you haven't, go watch. I would suggest watching on Netflix. There's 2 documentaries on there. It's crazy how the case is so divided into those who believe the brothers and those who don't. I won't spoil it for anyone here, but all I'll say is that criminals come from all demographics. And just because the Menendez dad was a well-known businessman, that alone doesn't make him incapable of abusing his sons. Okay, now go watch it and maybe we can do like an IG live discussion about that case. Not in that I have done any of my own research on that case, but more or less to just have an open discussion with anybody who has watched those true crime documentaries. Okay, now I have to apologize for leaving you high and dry last week waiting for part 3 of this miniseries on the Green River Killer. But when I left Florida running from Hurricane Milton, not because I was evacuated, but by choice, I did not pack a mic and I hardly even turned my computer on while I was gone. I basically took it as a mini fall break from the podcast. That being said, thank you all for the well wishes. My house and community fared well, although they lost power for like 15 hours. And as I was driving, I saw that many fences did not fare well with the winds and the tornado. Yes, I heard the tornado warnings were the scariest part. For all my Florida listeners, I pray that you are all doing okay. And honestly, let's just prep for the next one. So, one of my listeners, Ali, made a comment on Spotify that said, quote, "This series can be called How Many Times Will the Cops Talk to the Killer and Let Him Go? More than a couple of times," end quote. And my response to Ali is yes, for real. It got me thinking about whether it would have been prudent to put like a team of cops to follow this guy around for a few months and catch him before he killed another woman. Because there were weeks where this guy would kill women like every 2 or 3 days. Well, as much as I hate this man, I do have to wrap up this series talking about many more victims, the final sentence, and some current news that brought this guy back into the media recently, like less than 2 months ago recently. Join me today as I conclude my series on the Green River Killer. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
So you already know that Ridgway was drafted into the Navy. He served his time and was honorably discharged. But the closest military connection to this case is even crazier. I've mentioned Ridgway's son a few times during this miniseries. Well, when Ridgway was arrested on November 30th, 2001, his son Matthew was a 26-year-old married active duty member of the United States Marine Corps, and he was stationed in California. Can you imagine how his life was rocked when he heard the news that his dad was a prolific serial killer? A detective from the King County Sheriff's Department flew down to talk to Matthew. During the interview, the detective asked Matthew several questions. One of them was, "Did your dad attend your school functions?" Matthew's answer might surprise you. He said, quote, even when I was in the 4th grade, when I was in soccer, he'd always, he was there for me. I don't think I ever remember him not being there, end quote. Matthew went on to describe his father as quiet, with few friends, and that the man struggled with words. He was what I will call a part-time father since Matthew's mother had divorced Ridgway, but Matthew had a lot of fond memories of his dad. Matthew said that the older Ridgway was frugal, and they would go to garage sales and swap meets on the weekends where his father would purchase broken things like watches, toys, and furniture, then take them home to fix them. They did normal father-son activities like camping and playing baseball. They camped in both Washington and Oregon, begging the question, did Ridgway have his son with him when he was transporting remains across the state borders to dump them in the Portland area? Matthew said that there was nothing his father did that would have made him think he was, at the time, in 2003, the United States' most prolific serial killer. Matthew described that sometimes his father would pick him up after his shift at the Kenworth plant, which was at about midnight. He would take him to buy a donut, then they would head down to the PHS and park in front of the Red Lion Hotel and just watch the elevators go up and down. That area was one of the main locations that Ridgway hunted for victims. But to Matthew, who was just a young boy, it probably just felt like a fun night out with his father, especially if he was eating a donut after midnight. Matthew said that he never heard his father talking about sex workers, much less hurting them or even anyone at all. He never yelled, he didn't use racial slurs, and he didn't argue very often with Matthew's mom, Marcia, who was Ridgway's second wife. When Ridgway was looked at as a suspect early in the investigation, Matthew stated that he just thought his dad was one of like 500 suspects. He told the detective, I think that's how I related it, that he's just one of the guys that happened to be in one place, he's my dad. He didn't do it, When he was in the 4th or 5th grade, which would have been around 1985, Matthew's mom told him what to say if the media approached him. Basically, no comment. So that begs the question, did Ridgway's second wife suspect him as the Green River Killer? I left off in part 2 with the set of victims found along Highway 410. The next victims that Ridgway confessed to were all found at the intersection of Interstate 90 and Highway 18, also known as the Leisure Time site because there was a resort called Leisure Time nearby. 2 of the victims located there were found in the early 80s, but one of the victims wasn't found until 20 years later. The second victim that was dumped near I-90 and Highway 18 was 19-year-old Maureen Feeney. Maureen had moved to Seattle from Bellevue, which is an upscale suburb northeast of the city. She had been working at a daycare when she moved, and her coworkers later said that they had noticed a change in her behavior. After she was in Seattle, she became involved with a boyfriend who said that she had become involved with sex work, but he said he didn't have any specifics about her activities. On September 27, 1983, Maureen quit her job at the daycare, and the following day, her boyfriend said that she left their apartment and never returned. He notified her family, who reported her disappearance to the Seattle PD. Her family did everything they could to find her, but did not come up with any leads. The police revealed that they found 2 jaywalking citations on someone with the name Chris Pons, who had the same physical description, date of birth, phone number, and address as Maureen. Chris Pons, with a K, K-R-I-S, had even listed the daycare as their employment. According to the police, jaywalking was commonly written as a citation to suspected sex workers. Maureen's remains weren't found for almost 3 years when a corrections officer from a nearby juvenile detention center stumbled across skeletal remains while they were searching for an escapee. The bones were found south of the intersection of I-90 and Highway 18 near a shed. They were found on the opposite side of Highway 18 where Tina Thompson's remains had been located. Maureen's remains were scattered over a larger area with some of the bones located near barbed wire fence. In 2003, Ridgway remembered picking up a white woman with brown hair that was somewhere around 18 to 20 years old. He said that he picked Maureen up in Seattle and killed her at night in the back of his truck. When he was in the process of dumping her body at midnight, a work crew came by and lights came on. He also admitted to going back to Maureen's body and having sex with it after he placed her by the fence. The last victims whose remains were located at the I-90 Highway 18 intersection dump site belonged to 17-year-old April Buttram. She left Spokane in July 1983 and moved to Seattle, where she became involved in sex work, mainly on Rainier Avenue. She was only in Seattle for a month when she went missing in late August of '83. The sad truth is, no one really knows when she went missing. She was arrested for prostitution on August 4th of '83, and she spent 6 days in juvenile detention. She was contacted by police again on August 18th, and her pimp recalled seeing her sometime before September 1st. The pimp, however, never reported her missing because he figured she just left. April's mom reported her missing in March of 1983, and despite not finding her remains, in July of '84, April was listed as a victim of the Green River Killer. Like with a few of the other victims, people claimed that she was still alive and working as a sex worker in California or just south of Seattle and Tacoma. When Ridgway was being interviewed in 2003, he admitted that he had killed April Buttram, and this time he recognized her picture. He had roughly denied recognizing most of the other victims to this point until he was shown April's picture. He thought that he had picked up April on Rainier Avenue, which checks out because that was the road that she worked at the time of her disappearance. Ridgway wasn't sure where he placed her body, though. He thought maybe he buried her under a fern near Lake Fenwick, but maybe she was placed near the Leisure Time Resort. Then he thought, maybe that was a different woman. He did claim that he went back to the Leisure Time dump site sometime in the spring of '84, which was about 8 months after April was last seen. He claimed that there were only a few bones left. He picked up the skull and brought it to Oregon with bones belonging to Denise Bush and Shirley Sherrill in '84. This was one of the trips that he had made with his son. Ridgway claimed that he left April's skull near an exit on I-5, but it's never been found. His hope of scattering the remains in different locations was to confuse the task force by moving some of the remains down to Oregon. A few years later, Ridgway convinced his parents to buy a membership at Leisure Time Resort's campground. He did this so that he could go there and walk the road knowing he had dumped a body there. He and his third wife would go camping at Leisure Time Resorts several times a year, and they would walk their dogs near the dump site. Ridgway's son Matthew also remembered walking as a family along the road there. Detectives brought Ridgway to the site in 2003 where he pointed to a location. Even though the trees were much bigger than they had been 20 years prior, he said he was 100% sure he had left the body there. In the months following Ridgway's identification of the location, detectives searched the area and recovered 2 human bones. The bones were processed and a mitochondrial DNA profile was developed from them. Mitochondrial DNA is the DNA that is inherited from a mother. The bones were identified as belonging to April Buttram. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns, and April is Financial Literacy Month, an entire month dedicated to taking control of your money. Because honestly, no one really taught me how to manage money growing up. I didn't learn about investing until I was well into adulthood. But what I love about Acorns is that it makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future in just 5 minutes. I know, April is an entire month, but you don't need an entire month to learn. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns recommends a diversified portfolio that matches you and your goals. You can start with just your spare change. And you don't need a lot of time. Setup takes just 5 minutes because I know that your time is precious. And if financial wellness has ever felt out of reach, Acorns makes it simple, giving your money a chance to grow without the overwhelm. Personally, using Acorns gave me the confidence to stop putting it off and just start. And that peace of mind is completely worth it. Sign up now and join over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $25 billion with a B dollars with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/militarymama or download the Acorns app to get started today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/militarymama.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, streaming now only on Netflix.
On September 12, 1983, 19-year-old Tracy Winston finished serving a jail sentence for prostitution and was released. She had been staying in a motel on Aurora Avenue in North Seattle with her boyfriend. After her release, she called a man she had previously, quote, dated, and asked him to meet up and bring her money to pay her rent. The man agreed and drove to the hotel and gave Tracy some money. After he paid her, she asked him to give her a ride to the Northgate Mall, where he dropped her off around 6 p.m. She never made it back to the motel, and she never contacted her family again. In the spring of '86 in Cottonwood Park in Kent, 2 park employees found human remains under a large tree. The park is located along the banks of the Green River and only about a quarter mile from where the first 6 Green River victims were found either near or in the river. The remains found in '86 were mostly just a human torso. Despite searching extensively for more remains like the skull or limbs, nothing else was located. Without a skull or the jawbone, they were unable to make an identification of the body using dental records. It would take a whopping 13 more years, but in 1999, the bones were tested using new technology, and the mitochondrial DNA revealed that the torso belonged to Tracy Winston. When Ridgway was confessing in 2003, he admitted to killing Tracy. He didn't have specific memories of her, but he maintained that he was responsible for her death. He recalled that Tracy was killed at night and that he dumped her body near the park. He told investigators that he picked Cottonwood Park because it was, quote, a good place along the river and it was a while after the other ones were found, so that's why I chose it, end quote. Ridgway had no explanation as to where the missing parts of Tracy's remains might have been. The next dump site that we'll cover is also off of I-90, but this time near Exit 38, which is about 18 miles farther east than the I-90 Highway 18 dump site that we just spoke about. Ridgway continued to spill the beans to detectives in 2003, and he divulged information about the 3 bodies he left at the Exit 38 dump site. The first was Delores Plager, who was 22 years old. She had been living with a friend in Seattle who had a child. On October 30th, 1983, Delores was dropped off in the Beacon Hill neighborhood of Seattle. She was supposed to bring a Halloween costume home with her for her friend's child, but Delores never returned to her friend's house. Delese's remains were found on Valentine's Day, 1984, about 5 months after she disappeared. Her body was located underneath a pile of logs, but at the time, no identification was made because no one had reported Delores missing at that time. 2 months later, in April of '84, a friend reported Delores missing because they felt that Delores fit the profile of a Green River victim. It took another year, but Delese's remains were identified through a comparison of her medical records. During his confession, Ridgway remembered that he had dumped the bodies of 2 women on opposite sides of the exit. He recalled that he placed Delese's body between 2 logs on the south side of the exit, which is where she was found. However, he thought she was black and Delores was white. It didn't take Ridgway very long, less than 2 days, before he killed again. This time, he picked up 21-year-old Kim Nelson. Kim was super distinctive looking. She was close to 6 feet tall with super short blonde bleached hair. Kim was a sex worker who kind of drifted from city to city along the West Coast, and she had just arrived in Seattle in August of '83. And that's where she was living with another sex worker named Paige Miley in a motel near the PHS. She had been arrested several times and was serving a stint at the end of October of '83. She was released on the morning of October 30th, and on November 1st, she went with her roommate to a bus stop on the PHS. Paige, the roommate, left with a man in a car for a, quote, date, and when she returned, Kim was gone, and she never saw her again. A few nights later, Paige was working on the PHS again when a white man in his early 20s, early 30s, with brown hair and a wispy mustache, drove up in a pickup truck that had a canopy over the bed. The man asked Paige where her tall blonde friend was, meaning Kim. And it was an interesting question because the women had only worked together on the PHS that one time, and she went missing. How would this random guy know to ask about Kim? Paige wisely refused to go with the man because she suspected he might be the reason Kim was missing. Kim was reported as missing a few days later, and Paige told police about the man and how he had asked about Kim. Well, 8 months later, in April of 1984, Ridgway was being interviewed by detectives about sex workers he had contact with on the PHS. He told the investigators that he had seen Kim, he remembered her, and that he had also spoken to Paige about Kim's disappearance. Ridgway then alleged that Paige told him that she thought that Kim had been gotten by the Green River Killer. Now, to my Spotify listener, Ali, here we go again, another time where the killer was questioned yet released. 2 years later, almost 3 years after she had disappeared, Kim's skull and a few of her bones were found in the woods off of I-90 near exit 38. A year later, in '87, the Green River Task Force reached out to Paige again and showed her a photo lineup that had a picture of, you guessed it, Ridgway. As soon as Paige saw his picture, she identified Ridgway as the man who had asked her about Kim after she had disappeared. In 2003, Ridgway gave a detailed description of killing Kim. He had picked her up in the morning hours because he was working the night shift at the time. He took her to his house and killed her in his bedroom, but Kim didn't go down without a fight. You see, she was taller than Ridgway and she fought for her life. Ridgway was able to overpower her, and after he killed her, he took her clothing and jewelry. He wrapped her body in a rug and threw her into the truck after he pulled it up to his front door. Because it was daylight hours outside, he had to try to conceal what he was doing. He drove up along a dirt road to dump her body at a site where no one could see him. He went on to accurately describe where Kim's remains were found. However, when he was taken to the scene, he had a hard time pointing it out since the trees had grown significantly in the 19 years since he had dumped the body. When asked why he asked Paige about Kim, Ridgway thought that he would just try to get a, quote, date with Paige and didn't give it much thought that she might think it was suspicious. In March of '84, a military convoy stopped at exit 38, and a soldier made a horrifying discovery. He found the body of a woman lying just north of the road between two logs, not far from a stream. 19-year-old Lisa Yates was last seen in December of '83 by her pimp/boyfriend when she left to work on Rainier Avenue and the PHS. Despite Lisa never returning, her pimp, aka her boyfriend, or anyone else for that matter, never reported her missing. During the 2003 interview with Ridgway, he vacillated about whether Lisa was one of his victims or not. He told investigators that he had his roof repaired during the month of December of '83, and he did remember killing someone on one of the days his roof was being worked on. Ridgway said he picked up the woman and brought her to his house to have sex, but since there were still workers there, he drove to the South Center Mall and then strangled the victim in the back of his truck. He also accurately described where he had put the woman's body by the stream on the opposite side of the road where he had dumped Delores Plager. On February 6, 1984, 16-year-old Mary West left her aunt's house and headed out to work along Aurora Avenue, north in downtown Seattle. It was a month before her 17th birthday. The last time anyone saw her was that afternoon out on Rainier Avenue. 2 days later, her aunt reported her missing. A year and a half later, on September 8, 1985, a teacher leading students on a field trip spotted Mary's skull in Seward Park, which is a small peninsula on Lake Washington south of the city. The remainder of her skeletal remains were found during a later search. Mary's skeleton was located at the base of a big fir tree with no clothing, jewelry, or any other identifying items near her remains. Ridgway gave a full confession to Mary's murder during his interview in 2003. He told investigators that he, quote, figured it was a good place to have a date and kill a woman, end quote, meaning Seward Park. He also provided details like he had with the previous victims and said that they went on a trail and then put down a blanket. He remembered that she was black and that she was less than 20 years old. Ridgway used his ruse of saying a car was coming to get the woman to raise her head and expose her neck. When Mary looked up, he grabbed her neck and strangled her. Mary didn't go down without a fight, however, and fought back against him. Ridgway told her that if she stopped fighting, he'd let her go. While that worked with some of the other victims, Mary continued to struggle and left gouges on Ridgway's back. As with so many victims, Mary lost her fight and her life to Ridgway. He said after she was dead, he pulled her body deeper into the park, took her clothes and jewelry, and covered her body with debris. In 2003, Ridgway took the task force to the park and correctly pointed out where Mary's skeletal remains had been found. 17-year-old Cindy Smith called her mom in March of '84 saying she wanted to return home to Des Moines, Washington. You see, Cindy had moved to California with her boyfriend where she had worked for a couple of years as a topless dancer and sex worker. When she called her mom immediately purchased her a plane ticket, and Cindy flew back to Seattle a few days after she called her mom. Within hours of being home and reuniting with her family, Cindy left at 11 a.m. on March 13th, heading for the PHS. She was planning on looking for a job at one of the top list dance businesses in that area. Her family never saw her again. More than 3 years later, some children playing in a ditch started poking at a pile of garbage when all of a sudden a human skull came rolling out. After the police arrived at the scene, they located the rest of the skeleton under a pile of woods. The remains didn't have any clothes on it except for one piece of material that was later determined to be a tube top wrapped around the collarbone. The bones were later identified as belonging to Cindy Smith. As with so many others, Cindy's death went unsolved until 2003 when Ridgway confessed to dozens of murders. In Cindy's case, Ridgway first claimed that he couldn't remember the particulars about her death, but insisted that she was one of his victims and described the ditch where she had been found. Now listen, I don't know about you, but as I was reading this research, I was getting super suspect of this guy. I know he's a killer, but did he really kill all these women? Well, we'll see. Anyway, despite claiming to not remember details, Ridgway accurately described the location on a small road of Highway 18 near their community college. He remembered covering her body with debris, including a piece of wood, which matched up with how her remains were found. Ridgway was surprised that it took 3 years for anyone to find her body. He figured she'd be found fast since she was so close to the road. When the task force drove Ridgway out to the dump site, he was unable to identify the location. However, the exit that he had taken no longer existed and the area had changed quite a bit. When detectives showed him aerial pictures from '84, Ridgway was able to point out the exit he took. When they showed pictures of the scene where Cindy's body was found, Ridgway was able to identify them as the location where he had left her body. And it should be noted that they had not told him where the photos were taken from before they showed them to him. 2 years after Cindy vanished, on October 17th of 1986, 19-year-old Patricia Barczyk vanished after going out on the PHS to look for sex work. Her remains would not be found for 6.5 years, when a highway maintenance worker found her skull in February of 1993.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
We off?
30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes!
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree?
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet?
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
During his confession in 2003, Ridgway referred to a victim he confessed to as the Sir Lady, where Sir, S-I-R, stood for Seattle International Raceway. He told detectives that he had dumped a body where people took a shortcut to the raceway. When they showed Ridgway an aerial photograph of that area, he pointed to a location where he had left the woman he killed, which was Patricia. Patricia was never listed as a victim of the Green River, nor were Ridgway or his lawyers given any information about her body. He voluntarily provided that information, and Patricia was added to his list of victims. Ridgway referred to the area where Cindy and Patricia were found as a, quote, cluster, which was the term he used for a dump site that had more than one body. 5 years after Patricia Barczyk's remains were found, on August 4th, 1998, the owner of a wrecking company in the South Park neighborhood in Seattle opened the locked fence around his wrecking yard for the day. Just outside of the yard in a gravel parking lot, the owner found the body of a woman. Her body was fully clothed, undergarments and everything. She also had her boots and socks on. The woman was determined to be 38-year-old Patricia Yellowrobe. When the King County medical examiner concluded Patricia's autopsy, they noted the absence of injury to the body. Despite there being no visible spermatozoa either in the oral or vaginal swabs collected, the swabs and other biological evidence were sent in for DNA typing at the state crime lab. Patricia Yellowrobe's blood tested positive for high levels of alcohol and controlled substances. The vaginal swab did have a small amount of semen, but in 1998, it was too small of a sample to be able to provide a DNA profile. The medical examiner determined that Patricia's cause of death was acute combined opiate and ethanol intoxication and concluded that her death was probably an accidental overdose based on the absence of any injuries. Just like Patricia Barczyk, Patricia Yellowrobe was not considered a victim of the Green River Killer in 1998 when her body was found. And nothing regarding her death, like pictures, were provided to Ridgway's legal team prior to his long confession. In 2003, during Ridgway's interviews and trips to dump sites, detectives would sometimes take Ridgway to what they called false sites. They basically did this to test his reliability. Most of the time, they chose sites that never had human remains found on them. They did take him to the wrecking yard where Patricia Yellowrobe's body had been found. However, you have to remember, at the time of Patricia's death, her death had been determined to be an accidental overdose. It was not at all associated with Ridgway or any of the other Green River victims. Ridgway would later tell detectives that he didn't think he ever killed anyone in South Park. He also said that he didn't hurt any of the women that he hired for sex work in the 1990s. The task force operated under the assumption that the Green River Killer didn't kill any women after the mid-80s. But in that 2003 interview, Ridgway would break that theory. Toward the end of a long interview session, one of the detectives asked Ridgway an open-ended question. "Is there anything else I should talk to you about?" Ridgway stammered back and said, "I promised that I wouldn't lie, but..." And the detective was like, "Okay, if you told me a lie, I don't care. Just tell me. I just want to know the truth." Ridgway thought about it and said something about potentially the site at South Park. Anyway, he went on to confess to killing Patricia Yellowrobe and leaving her body in the gravel parking lot near the wrecking yard. The information he provided came out slowly, but in the end, Ridgway knew information that only the killer could have known. Ridgway told the detectives that he had memory of killing a woman in South Park, but that it was, quote, fuzzy, and he couldn't remember it well. He wasn't certain that he killed anyone there, but he had been thinking about a murder for a few days, and it had been bugging him. Of course, he's talking about like having thought back in 2003 about all the murders he had committed after he was caught. His fuzzy memory was that he had struggled with a black woman on the ground at a site next to the freeway that was surrounded by blackberry bushes and a road that had like a U-turn. That description turned out to accurately describe where Patricia Yellowrobe's body had been found. But Patricia Yellowrobe was not black. But she wasn't white either. She was Native American and registered at the Rocky Boys Indian Reservation in Montana as a member of the Chippewa Cree Nation. Ridgway went on saying that he couldn't remember if she was naked or not, which was out of the norm for most of his other victims. He told detectives that he couldn't remember which vehicle he had been driving for that particular killing, or even the decade that it took place in. What he could remember was that the victim seemed to be pretty easy to kill. Detectives did not question Ridgway any further about this victim. After about a week, they sent in a forensic psychologist to get more information about Patricia Yellowrobe, who was thought to have been one of his last victims, if not his last victim. And here's how that conversation went. The doctor, who was next after that? Ridgway, I vaguely remember killing a woman over in South Park. The doctor, where? And tell me again, in South Park? That doesn't mean anything to me. Ridgway, south is South Park and right next to the freeway. I first thought I killed her and she was naked, but I've been thinking about it and I think I was having sex with her in the back of the truck and I was ready to, walked out to the passenger side to open the door for her and I didn't want to pay for the sex and I choked her and she was fully clothed, I think. And I don't remember if one of the women, when I choked her, she wet her pants, but I don't know if that was the one or not. Forensically, it could not be determined if Patricia urinated at the moment she died, but most of Ridgway's victims were naked, so they couldn't have, in his own words, literally, quote, wet their pants. While Ridgway kept telling the psychologist that his memory was vague about this incident, he discussed the case with plenty of details. He told the doctor that he had sex with the woman in a parking lot next to the freeway on a dead-end driveway, and this was where he left her body. Well, it turns out Patricia Yellowrobe was found in the parking lot that was on a dead-end road that had a turnaround. Ridgway also accurately recalled Patricia Yellowrobe's thin stature. She was 5 foot 10 inches tall at autopsy, and she weighed 132 pounds. Ridgway told the psychologist that he got mad at Patricia when she didn't perform to his expectations sexually. He said, quote, "I just didn't want to pay for somebody just laying around," end quote. Ridgway told the detectives that he did not climax when he had sex with Patricia, and that explained why when the trace amounts of semen were tested again, it didn't match him. The next day, investigators showed Ridgway an aerial photograph of the wrecking yard and the parking lot as it looked in 1998. He pointed right at the spot where Patricia's body was found. They showed him a picture of Patricia alive, but he didn't recognize her. When they showed him a picture of her body at the scene, he said, quote, "Yeah, that looks like her," end quote. Which is crazy because Patricia was murdered in 1998 and he was interviewed in 2003, which was, 5 years later? But then when he was interviewed about cases that happened like in the 80s, he remembered everything like to the T, which I don't know, maybe age had something to do with that. When Ridgway's confession was presented to the King County Medical Examiner, the ME said that Patricia could have been strangled without any physical evidence left behind. They went on to say that she was intoxicated at a level that could have compromised her ability to be strangled for even a few seconds before she would have died. Back in episode 2 of this miniseries, I told you about Marie Malvar, who Ridgway had hidden in his house on the day police officers came to his house in '83. She had scratched him so deeply that it left a scar that he tried to disguise by burning it with battery acid. Ridgway confessed to dumping her body in a ravine near Auburn, Washington, close to the Mountain View Cemetery. 60 human bones, including the skull and mandible, were located. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Marie Malvar. A pair of pantyhose were found near several of her neck vertebrae, and it looked like they had been used as a ligature to strangle Marie. At the very beginning of Ridgway's marathon confession, which was on June 13, 2003, he described the site off of Kent Des Moines Road that he was, quote, 100% certain, end quote, that there was a victim who had not been recovered, and he was sure the remains would still be there. He told detectives that when he drove by it, he would remember it as a dump site. Ridgway described the victim as white, between 16 and 20 years old, skinny woman with brown or blonde shoulder-length hair. Ridgway was inconsistent when saying when he had killed this young woman, vacillating that it was between 82 and 83, but also saying it might have happened in the 1970s. On one of the excursions in 2003 to the dump sites, Ridgway was taken to the Kent Des Moines Road area that he had described in his earlier confession. He pointed out exactly where he had dumped the body, and the task force crime scene team were able to recover, get this, 23 human bones there. Unfortunately, there wasn't a skull with the rest of the bones that could have aided in the identification of the remains at the time, which was 2003. So those remains were identified as Bones 20, or B20 for short. Gary Leon Ridgway faced a judge on November 5, 2003, after months of confessions. His reign of terror spanned from the early 1980s through 1998. That's roughly 18 years. A prosecutor read Ridgway's detailed confession to the judge. After his confession was read, the judge read each charge of aggravated murder in the first degree. Ridgway answered with his plea of guilty 48 times. With his guilty plea, Ridgway was sentenced to 48 consecutive life terms, one for each life he took. He was sent to serve his time at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. But Ridgway's time in court didn't end there. In 2011, Ridgway was back in King County facing another murder charge for his 49th victim. That is 49. This all went down on Ridgway's 62nd birthday, and I truly can't think of a nicer present to give this monster than another life sentence. 20-year-old Rebecca Marrero's skull was located in a ravine near Auburn, Washington in December of 2010 by teenagers. The skull was found 100 feet from where investigators located Malvar's remains. Becky, as she was known to her family, was last seen leaving a motel in 1982. The young mother was never seen again. As part of his 2003 plea deal, Ridgway agreed to plead guilty to future charges in King County based on new evidence. Becky's sister, Mary Marrero, gave a victim impact statement at the hearing, saying that their family agonized for 29 whopping years, wondering what happened to her sister. She said, quote, "I don't agree with this plea deal to spare his pathetic life. It makes me sick to my stomach that he beat the system," end quote. Mary's voice was shaky, but she finished her sentence by saying to the judge, quote, "If I had one thing to ask today, it would be to kill him," end quote. And the courtroom was so dense that you can cut it with a knife. When Ridgway stood up and began to apologize to the family, someone in the courtroom shouted, "Shut your mouth." A year after Becky's remains were discovered, a judge sentenced Ridgway to a 49th consecutive life term in 2011, telling Becky's family, quote, "I'm sorry you had to wait this long for some truth and some justice," end quote. The judge then looked at Ridgway, saying to him, "I can find no compassion." Another year went by when there was another update to the case. Sandra Denise Major's family had reported her missing on Christmas Eve in 1982. She was 20 years old when she was last seen getting into a pickup truck in North Seattle. Throughout the years that followed Sandra's disappearance, family members had seen a Lifetime movie about the Green River Killer, and they wondered if Sandra could have been one of his victims. In a coordinated effort, detectives in Rochester, New York, took DNA swabs from Sandra's two brothers and her sister. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children worked with the University of Texas Center for Human Identification to expedite the testing. The results of the test showed that Sandra Denise Major was one and the same with Bones 16, aka B16, one of Ridgway's Mountain View Cemetery victims. Sandra's remains had gone unidentified for nearly 25 years when her family got the news they dreaded. Sandra was, in fact, one of Ridgway's victims.
This episode is brought to you by Factor. Optimize your nutrition this year with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved, ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Eat smarter at factormeals.com/listen50 and use code listen50 for 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Factormeals.com/listen50, code listen50. T's and C's apply.
If you can even believe it, during the pandemic in 2020, Ridgway was actually considered for compassionate release. Yes, compassionate release. This was part of a lawsuit against the state of Washington to release thousands of eligible inmates. However, in a vote of 5-4, the Supreme Court of Washington denied their release. And listen, it's insane that he would have even been considered for release, and it's just crazy that it was so close, 5-4. Since Ridgway's last conviction and sentence addition, DNA technology has been growing by leaps and bounds. The previously unidentified bones located at some of the dump sites could now be tested using the new tool called genetic genealogy through the Paraben Nanolabs, Othram, and volunteers with the DNA Dope Project. In January of 2021, the victim known simply as B10 was finally identified as 14-year-old Wendy Stephens. She had run away from her family's house in Denver and somehow had made her way to Seattle, where she became what is believed to be Ridgway's youngest victim. Wendy's leg bone was discovered in 1984, and a search revealed more of her remains that were located at a baseball field. Wendy's mother had uploaded her own DNA and GED match in February of 2019, hoping that with the new genetic genealogy work that had been making headlines around that time, that it would help find her missing daughter. Unfortunately, right after this mother had submitted her DNA, GED Match changed their policies to require submitters to, quote, opt in. The policy then allowed law enforcement access to the DNA kits in the site's database, but the users had to explicitly agree, and this mother had not done so because it wasn't a requirement at the time. The DNA Doe Project, based in California, however, did the legwork to track down relatives announcing the match 2 years after Wendy's mom had submitted her DNA to GED Match. Wendy's mom had no idea about the change in policy. If she had, then her daughter's case could have been solved in 2019. On December 19, 2023, King County Sheriff's Office announced that a previously unidentified victim known only as Bones 17, or B17, that was found near Mountain View Cemetery had finally been identified. When the bones were discovered in 1985, a forensic anthropologist had determined that B17 was a Caucasian female between 14 and 17 years old. But now, B17 actually had a name. Lori Ann Ratzpotnik. She was 15 years old when she ran away from home in Lewis County, which is very close to King County. The last time her mom or brother had seen her was in 1982 when she ran away. Lori's father had passed away when she was just 4 years old. According to her obituary, her mother said that Lori was a firecracker that got straight A's without even having to crack a book open. She loved horseback and motorcycle riding and fighting her brother's battles. Sadly, Lori's brother passed away in 2010 before Lori was identified. The final Jane Doe, known as Bones 20 or B20, was the last set of remains to be identified. They were found in 2003 when Ridgway was arrested. And this year, in January of 2024, Bones 20 was announced as a match to 16-year-old Tammy Lyles from Everett, Washington. She had gone missing on June 9, 1983, from downtown Seattle. Her jawbone was part of the skeletal remains that were found in Tigard, Oregon in 1985. Tammy had been identified using dental records compared to the jawbone in 1988, but Ridgway denied that he had killed her. The Texas-based genealogy company Othram built the DNA profile and tentatively identified B20 as Tammy. Once a DNA sample was obtained from her mother, a confirmation was made and the rest of Tammy's remains were identified. Ridgway did confess to killing B20 during his 2003 confession, and when the match was made between Tammy and her remains, it closed the chapter on the Jane Doe unidentified victims. Before I conclude this miniseries, I want to talk about 3 missing women who are most likely Ridgway victims as well. Ridgway confessed to killing and dumping all 3 of these young women, but because of a lack of evidence for each of them, their cases are unsolved and not currently connected as Green River cases or counted as Green River cases. The first is 16-year-old Casey Ann Lee. She went missing from Seattle on August 28, 1982. She was a sex worker but also had a job at Photomat where pictures were developed. She was a newlywed at the time that she went missing. She had married her husband, Anthony Lee, who went by Pretty Tony, 4 months before her disappearance. Casey left their apartment to go pick up some hamburger meat, but never returned. Ridgway suggested that he had killed Casey, but was unable to recognize her in a picture. The area he claims he left her body is impossible to search now due to construction and development. The second possible victim is 18-year-old Kelly Kay McGinnis. She went missing on June 28, 1983. After checking into the Three Bears Motel on the PHS, she left a few personal items in her room but never returned. She was a known sex worker and had been living on the streets since she was 14 years old. At the time she went missing, Kelly had a 14-month-old daughter who was in foster care. After Ridgway was identified as the Green River Killer, an eyewitness confirmed that Kelly was seen with him parked near a baseball field on the PHS. During his marathon confession in 2003, Ridgway confessed to killing Kelly, but he thought he dumped her body near Lake Fenwick in southern King County. Despite searches in that area, Kelly's remains have never been found, so Ridgway has not been prosecuted for her murder. The final unsolved case is that of 19-year-old Patricia Ann Osborne. Patricia was last seen on October 28, 1983, when she left her boyfriend at the motel they were living in. She was headed to meet a, quote, date at a restaurant that had been arranged over the phone, but she never made it. Starting when she was a young teenager, Patricia started getting into trouble and using drugs. She then turned to sex work to support herself and moved to Seattle. Despite her troubles, Patricia always called her mom on holidays and her birthday. The calls, however, stopped after Patricia disappeared. Ridgway could not provide any details about Patricia's murder or where he may have placed her body. And guess what, True Crime Army? I don't think we've heard the last of this case. The most recent news of this case came on Monday, September 9th, 2024, which is less than 2 months from the airing of this episode, where Ridgway was transferred from the state penitentiary in Walla Walla, where he was booked into the King County Jail on a, quote, institutional hold, end quote. The now 75-year-old Ridgway was held there until Friday, September 13th, when he was returned to the state pen. There was no word as to why he was transferred, like if there had been any breaks in the 3 unsolved cases, which is what I hope has happened. I'll stay on top of it and will update everyone on this case as soon as something is announced. If you're not already a Patreon member, I would suggest signing up as a free member. Yes, you heard me correctly. There is a free membership. That way, you can be kept up to date with any case updates. One last thing, and this by no means is an endorsement, and this is about this case, but former detective, former sheriff David Riker is running for governor in the state of Washington this November. In researching this episode, I also learned that Dave Riker is a veteran of the Air Force Reserves. He joined in 1971 and served in the 939th Military Aircraft Command. So there are military connections all over this case. Thank you all for checking out my 3-part miniseries on the Green River Killer and following all 49 potentially 50-plus victims, which were all named during the series. Most of the time with a prolific serial killer like this one, all of the victims will not be named, but I am making it a point to talk about their lives, however little we may know. As you may have heard, Patreon, which is a way to support your favorite creators, now has a free option. I encourage all of you to join as a free member so that you can see what new bonus content I put out and then you can decide if you want to hear it or not. I also try my best to update Patreon when an episode is delayed or when there is an update on a case. Patreon is also a great way to message me directly. I respond to all of my Patreon messages. There is no way for me to respond to social media requests, so if you have been wanting to get in touch, reach me on Patreon by visiting patreon.com. That's patreon.com/militarymurder. Shout out to my girl Myrtle for researching and writing this 3-part miniseries. My sources for this episode include various evidence and court documents obtained through the Seattle Times, a documentary titled Green River, Mind of a Monster, news articles from the Seattle Times, the Seattle PI, an episode of Cold Case, the Death Penalty Information Center, the King County, Washington webpage, the Kitsap Sun, the News Tribune, ABC News, NBC News, the Doe Network, and the Monitor. Military Murder was created by Mama Margot Productions, and the music was created by Ty-Ops. This month's executive producers are Falcon 13, Jen, and Myrtle. This month's newest associate producers are Wendy, Vicky, and Veronica. Our newest assistant producers are Serena and Anthony. If you are interested in supporting the show, make sure you visit patreon.com/militarymurder, or you can sign up for bonus content on Apple Premium. The music of the show was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next week.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.